Hello, hello. I think this is on. Great to be here, everyone. Appreciate everyone attending. And a big shout out to Celestia and Maven 11 for putting this on. Had the privilege of attending last year as well. And by far one of my favorite events that I've had the privilege of joining. So I'm excited to lead this panel today about really some great perspectives about investing in the modular ecosystem. So I want to throw it down the line. But first, my name's Joe. I invest in the space. And yeah, happy to let these guys introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm Matthijs. I'm one of the partners at Maven 11. I think we were the first investor or backer of Celestia, and I hope, therefore, we help the modular movement move forward a little bit.
That works. Yeah, I'm Yuri. I think together with Maven, actually, we're the first investor. Like, we're the second, I guess, right after you guys, when we called later. We're a little bit different, I guess, as a VC, so we'll maybe have a different perspective here. Because we look at the blockchain space, not specifically as blockchain, but we have a broader perspective on a better internet, let's say. So I hope we get a different perspective here between the more crypto VCs.
That's great. Okay.
Hey guys, yeah, Kelvin here, investment associate at Spartan. I guess we're the third investor in Celestia after you guys. So yeah, we've been investing since 2017 and looking into more modular space starting in 2019. And yeah, we've been fairly involved pretty recently as well.
That's great, guys. I think how I liked setting this conversation last year when I had the privilege of moderating is kind of getting some context into your guys' history in the space. I know you shared a little bit about it, but maybe quickly, like, what was maybe the first project you kind of recall giving you some of the inklings of kind of where the modular narrative is today, and like maybe what's one of the more recent ones as well?
Yeah, I think the first one, easy shout there, is Celestia, but I think maybe the sort of plasma or even Lightning Network on Bitcoin, you could argue that it moves execution off-chain. Currently, the most recent one, I won't name any portfolio company, but I think Eclipse is doing pretty cool. I think it's cool to see that they bring the Solana VM to like another ecosystem, which sort of shows the power of moving that execution off-chain.
Totally agree. Yuri?
Yeah, I mean, we went with Celestia as the first time we saw something really, really different from after like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it became clearer that there's something happening where you have to actually modularize or split certain functions. And we're kind of moving slow in that direction. So we're looking now at what's happening out there. So with all the decentralized sequencer, with intent-based architectures, with rollups, obviously, and then rollups with the services, and just looking at that from a tech perspective, like, okay, when is the next time something comes up that's so big that splits again in a way, right? Where you need to really modularize in such a way that it scales up again.
Totally. Yeah. And what's maybe like a recent project you've heard of that kind of maybe fits into some of those narratives, or one that you're following?
I'm following a couple of projects, but I talked yesterday with the Austria guys as well. So I'm kind of interested really in the decentralized sequences, not because they're right now interesting to us, but I think they're going to be a big thing once rollouts become a little bit more thriving, right? Once you have this happening around more, there will actually be a thing where you say, okay, what is the next bottleneck that we have to let might break? And that might be one of those things.
Cool. I'm excited to chat some more about that in a little bit. And Calvin, what about yourself?
Yeah, and Celestia is definitely one of the first projects that actually piqued my interest in the modular space as well. So back in 2021, started looking into it. It's interesting how such a minimalistic design chain could align so well with the ethos of censorship-resistant blockchain. So yeah, Celestia is definitely one of the first that's like the pioneer in the space as well. For a more recent project, I've been like Yuri just mentioned, with the proliferation of rollups in the space, I've been thinking more into the permissionlessness of moving liquidity across these rollups, right? So an example that project that we got involved in is called Catalyst. So essentially, it's a liquidity layer across all these rollups that allows users to transfer value natively across these.
Yeah, it'll definitely be an interesting challenge. I think that we'll probably get into a little bit during this conversation as well when it comes to maybe some of the trade-offs of modularity as well. Yeah, I think I would also just love to kind of understand, like, we kind of hinted at it a little bit there as far as some of the recent projects that you guys are following, but when we think back to maybe 12 or 14 months ago in Amsterdam, what are some of the things that are like top of mind as far as like what has changed specifically in that period of time?
Yeah, I think back then it was sort of like, okay, DA and rollups, that's all there is to the modular ecosystem. And since then, a few big trends, Optimism, Arbitrum obviously taking off in a big way. Also getting traction on the application level, which I think is very key. And we all talk about infrastructure here all day, but it does actually matter that we have users using these things. I think that's sort of validation of the thesis that rollups will scale more. And then obviously on the more technical or experimental side, you have things like modular MEV, so cross-chain MEV, intent-based architectures. Aditi just talked about that. And I think developments like sovereign rollups, which Sovereign Labs is obviously working on, are also like in that bucket of new experimental ideas that we love to see.
Got it. And what about maybe Calvin? We'll go to you and then to Yuri.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, maybe trends that you've seen over the last 12 to 14 months specifically that have like very much piqued your interest in the modular space.
Absolutely. So I think RAS, so robust service, so similar to what Matthias just mentioned as well. We've been seeing a lot of these getting competitive in space, different ways of solving the same problem as well. I think DA is also something that's interesting. So aside from Celestia, we're seeing obviously other DA solutions in the market, whether it's Veil or EigenDA.
Great. And Yuri, maybe anything to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, I agree with the guys. Also, RAS is kind of the easy way to think about. Once you think, oh, there might be many rollups, right? You need somebody to deploy them. So there's a service. That's kind of an easy idea, let's say. Not easy to actually realize, but it's an easy idea to think about.
Maybe to add to that a little bit, I'd love for you to maybe dig in on, like, if you have any opinions on maybe some of the economics that exist at that layer. I know I've heard maybe a variety of perspectives on how sufficiently those businesses or protocols can kind of bootstrap the economic considerations around where they sit in the stack. So free to anyone to answer, but I'm just curious to.
I think we all have opinions on this one. You want to go first, or shall I?
Sure, go ahead.
I think one sort of thing we hear a lot now is abundant block space. So all these DEA solutions that we hear about are like, oh, there will be so much block space that it won't really be valuable anymore. Whereas I think there is a big difference in the quality of block space, whether that's liquidity on that, verifiability of that block space, which obviously light clients play a big role in. So that's something where the value accrue will definitely happen, in my opinion, on the most valuable block space that a user can easily verify. There's a lot of liquidity on it, or MEV extractable on it, which could be interchangeable, and that you can easily deploy different rollups on. And that's, I think, also interesting that on Ethereum you still often deploy EVM rollups, whereas on Celestia you'll probably see a proliferation of different virtual machines.
A little bit of a bias for other execution
Oh,
environments.
of course.
Yuri, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the biggest gravity at the moment, maybe it's the bear market, but it's liquidity. It's fun to see if you even look at L2Beat and you think a TLV, for example, of the rollups. It's strange why, for example, Arbitrum Optimus doesn't have more of it, and more of it, especially after the breakdown last year, moved again to mainnet. Maybe this is the quality, right, of the block space, and you have more security or more battle testedness of the mainnet, and you just trust it more. I'm not sure. But it seems to be like, why isn't it going more up, right? Why isn't it going more to the rollups to do something? Because Aave and Uniswap, all of this is there, right? So the basic stuff basically people are using.
I think we discussed this one earlier or sometime ago as well, right? If I leave my assets somewhere for 10 years, I'm not going to do it on the rollup right now. I will just use Ethereum mainnet or Bitcoin.
Exactly. So how do you solve that? And then I thought about, to a certain degree, maybe you need some sort of tool or a company or protocol that's only exists on the roller, like GMX, for example, and Arbitrum and Avalanche, right? And around that, it slowly will build around an ecosystem, and then only it becomes as trustable as a mainnet.
Yeah, maybe to kind of like add to that and maybe pose another question to you guys. I think it actually might be like one of the trade-offs that probably is under discussed in this space specifically, which is to what degree with some of these like new implementations, with these new configurations of blockchains, can institutions or potentially like more advanced, like larger liquidity holders actually underwrite the risk associated with these architectures? So maybe we can pose that question to you guys. Like, how do you as investors kind of like underwrite that process, kind of the activation energy, or like potentially some people would use the word lendiness that has to develop in order to accrue or attract that liquidity?
Yeah, I think for us as venture investors, we can underwrite that, because we sort of do need to take a lot of risk to get the returns we aim for. But as like an institutional, debt fund allocating in DeFi or something, I understand that they see more risk in like experimental projects that are now going live in the modular space, etc. And they would maybe rather stick with a more mature DeFi stack on Ethereum. So I think there you just need to prove yourself over time. That you are there to stay and that they can allocate. So it's about sort of the risk, appetite of the investor.
Anything from you guys as far as like, I don't know, maybe how you as investors kind of at least attempt to underwrite some of the risks that like, these more modular configurable systems or architectures can introduce?
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to assessing different projects, I can actually use perhaps like a DA layer. So there's several ways we can assess this, right? So obviously, DA is a function of the cost as well as the transaction count. So you can do certain projections, right? Given how much I guess revenue the DA layer could actually make, and then you add on a premium to it, and you can actually you know have thinking like how they could actually monetize on top of it.
Yeah,
Right?
so you think of it from more of maybe an economic security perspective, or kind of where are you going with that as far as?
Sorry,
You're thinking of it more in relation to like the economic security perspective of like that sort of a thing would help an investor, like maybe like a liquid fund, better underwrite the risk of like a modular architecture.
yeah, I think that certainly will help. Yeah.
Matthias, I think one thing we had chatted a lot about is kind of like some of the different like founder types that we see specifically in the modular space. Would love to maybe throw it to you guys as far as like, are there things that stand out about like the types of individuals that you've had the privilege to support and invest in that are building in this space? Maybe unique characteristics, maybe bad things. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one since we've backed quite a few founders in this domain. I think right now what you see is it's usually quite tech-heavy people, and they like to be sort of nerd-sniped. So they like to think about ideas that are complex and that easily change as they move along. So they also need to be flexible in their architecture. I think that's sort of the current founder type you see in the space. I do expect that to sort of change over the next 3 to 4 years to also more consumer-facing, more commercial, business-minded people who just want to build an end product for users.
What do you think that shift will be like a byproduct of? Or like, what do you think will cause that? Like,
I think just maturity of the tech stack, right? So that they don't,
I think to some degree.
So that they don't need to worry about like the trade-off of MEV prevention or an intent or not, right? I think somebody who just wants to build a good user app doesn't want to care about what sort of transaction type there is.
Maybe I pivot this question to you guys as well when it comes to, I think everyone kind of agrees on this kind of opinion in the zeitgeist that like everyone is focusing on infra. There's probably not enough people focusing on applications. What are some of the things maybe that you guys are impressed by when it comes to like making some of these stacks more accessible? Like we have mentioned some of the roll-ups as a service providers, but I think, whether it's like net new execution environments, opening up the doors for developers from other ecosystems to come into Web3, like is there maybe a specific highlight of those categories that you think like make this technology more approachable for like application and like potentially like consumer developers as well?
I think actually what's really cool about the modular, let's say, mindset is not that you build modular, but the way that you're not locked into an ecosystem, especially through a token, right? So I try to run around Berlin and talk to people at why isn't people collaborating more together? There are a bunch of different ecosystems there. And somebody mentioned to me, well, when you develop something in your ecosystem, the incentive is really still like develop it in your ecosystem because you develop it outside, well, they profit from it, right? So and unintentionally, the token provides a barrier for collaboration to a certain degree because the band's so big already. Now, modular reason doesn't have that. Because you can collaborate rather easily. There's everything is more aligned, so the room for experimentation, the whole environment is way better. So what you have is really that there's a lot of people building really cool stuff out there, and they're just trying to figure out how to combine it, recombine it, and so on. But a lot of great ideas coming out of that, and one of these great ideas is that you, for example, can abstract away the token, right? I think Nick mentioned that 2 days ago on the ZK day, that you can actually build directly something on Celestia and don't have a token. This is a good thing because developers don't have to be financial anymore. They can just like start building, which is really cool for the application users in the end, right? So those kind of thinking is way more free and running more free and doing more experiments in the modular space. It's also about the founders who are really mindseted like that.
I don't know. We might have some people start sweating in the room when we start hearing no tokens, but another thing I'd like to pose to you guys, I'm like quite curious, specifically maybe on like Calvin and Matthias's perspective on like what are you bearish about in the modular ecosystem? Are there like specific things that you think are like currently discussed or like a lot of people are excited about that like maybe specifically as an investor you aren't that interested in, or maybe even like intellectually or like from a product market fit perspective you think like doesn't have a chance or you're not as excited about?
Yeah, so I guess I can just quickly take this. So that's a very good question. I think moving forward, there's going to be a challenge when it comes to justifying valuation. So I feel like during the bear market, a lot of people are looking into infrastructure that squeeze out all the valuation. And in order to justify these valuations, depending on what you build, fees might eventually compress in the future. So you'll have to find other ways to accrue value to what you're building, right? So perhaps owning, a more of the vertical stack, that's how you accrue more value.
Also bearish on high valuations. But Matthias, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with the fees point. I think sort of fees will compress per user, but the sum of fees that we collect on like the infrastructure as a whole, I hope will increase as we onboard more users. Sort of the bear case for modular crypto, I think, is either the complexity that you add by sort of incorporating all these different systems together. So if one of them breaks, that might not be good. And overall, maybe, but that's a larger bear case on crypto, that people just don't really care about end-user verification. So a large part of building a modular blockchain with data availability sampling is that everybody can run a light node very easily. I mean, we see the people from Celestia especially do it everywhere. But ultimately, the assumption there is that people do run around a light node and verify this thing themselves. Whereas maybe, well, they just don't do that.
Do you think people want to run light clients?
Yeah, I think otherwise you shouldn't be in crypto. But it's sort of why you built on the blockchain, right? You want to be able to verify it. Otherwise, you can just use an Excel sheet.
Yeah,
But
it reminds me of like the accessibility point that we mentioned earlier. Maybe earlier we were talking about the accessibility for developers with like external skill sets from crypto. But when you think about from a retail perspective, maybe what some of the purists who have like grown up in this industry like really like kind of like prioritize is really ensuring that these networks can be robust. And a huge part of that is ensuring that you have like a culture that exists around these blockchains of verifying state and having individuals capable of doing that. But maybe one thing I would pose to the group is I'm kind of convinced that we have to, in the same way we have to build, like modular execution environments, et cetera, to make it more accessible to developers. I think if we want people to care about, verifiability, we have to make it almost as like, easy as like wearing a wristwatch to tell the time in order to actually see like wide adoption. So maybe counter that if you guys steel man that perspective. Even as like a validator, like I still think people don't want to run
I actually
light
agree
clients.
with the perspective, right? And I do think people care about it. So that's sort of in your question, like, will they? I fundamentally do think so, because the most valuable sort of crypto networks also have that culture of running their own full nodes, right? Bitcoiners go mad if you make it slightly harder to run a Bitcoin full node. It's sort of the whole block size debate was about that. And Ethereum also puts in a lot of work into making it easy and accessible for everybody, like all over the world, with not a lot of money for hardware to run a full node. Obviously, you have trade-offs, but I do think that's what matters. So that's also why I'm pretty bullish on like being able to verify it yourself quite easily.
Maybe a question in the room, like how many of you guys have like ever run like a full node on a network, or maybe you're even like have tried or attempted to run a light client?
They're gonna counter my point.
Kudos to all of you. Everyone else, homework. At least give it a try. I really encourage everyone to give it a try.
I think maybe there's a difference in how you phrase, like especially if you go outside the blockchain space, the general blockchain space, where everybody's kind of excited about the tech. What does it mean to care about running a light client, for example, right? I think people do care about a lot of things, but they have like let's say, I care about it for 2 seconds, right? If you give it 2 seconds to me and I'm able to do it in 2 seconds, I do care. If it takes me 10 seconds, I will not care, right? So there's a kind of a resource allocation problem here, where you say, okay, how can we make you care about that within that time frame, right? And that's what you have basically on a website, right? You go on a website, there's a green button saying, okay, it's check, done, right? Cool. So I care for a second, that's it, but fine.
As long as you can establish that root of trust in your green SSL checkbox in your browser. I think we've seen a lot of kind of thought and probably innovation in the past 12 or 14 months on some of these like more sovereign constructs that we've started to see getting constructed. Do you guys have maybe some thoughts on the economic kind of implications of those sorts of constructs when you really remove kind of the application and execution layer from maybe some of the underlying economics that a network might be inheriting from an alternative L1 despite maintaining its sovereignty?
Oh no, I'm happy to go. I think that especially on sovereign app chains or app-specific rollups, whatever you want to call it, I think the value capture is way more easy, right? Because it's inherent to the application. So probably value will accrue to the application of the crypto stack and to the sort of bottom layer, which in my case would be a DA layer or whatnot. And I think if you have an app-specific chain, then it's quite easy to capture value by just extracting a fee for offering the application. So I think, the fee switch in Uniswap is famous, but if they had an app-specific chain, it would be quite easy to make it valuable, because every time somebody uses Uniswap, the block space gets used and validators capture some of that value.
Any thoughts from you guys on kind of sovereign constructs and how they could potentially modify or alter some of the economics for application developers?
Yeah, so I agree with what Matthias just said as well. I feel like app-specific chains will probably have a better chance of accruing more value. In some way, I actually feel like modularity it does make certain layer 2s like struggle to accrue sufficient value. This is why we're starting to see layer 3s getting built out, right? That's how you try to find other ways to accrue value. Oh, sorry. Yeah, onto your layer. So yeah, moving forward, I think we'll continue to see more layer 3s building on top, and yeah, continue to scale that way.
Yeah.
I don't see a difference happening, and there's a normal, let's say, traditional world where commoditization means that you will less and less accrue value, and everything on top of that will accrue more value. It's just that within the innovation cycle, I like to say that every infrastructure was application once. Right, you start out of that, like an email, even like an email protocol was an application once. You just started sending emails, and then more and more people built on that. It compressed basically down. What Matthias said before that, with that the fees per user might go down, but the fees in total might go up, right? So it depends, like what do you mean by really accrue value? But in general, as a sum, it might be that most of it at some point will be at application, but once the system is really thriving, like we have now in the Web2 world.
Do you think Uniswap's an application or infrastructure?
Which version?
No, yeah, so we argue about this at the office, like, are you investing in applications or infrastructure? And you were also alluding to this, right? And I do think that in crypto, it's often both. Because Uniswap, for sort of Panoptic as an example, they're building options using Uni v3 liquidity. So for them, Uniswap is the infrastructure. And then you sort of have an infra layer again that captures value.
Probably like why the conversation, like, I guess like that's probably part of the reason that that's like become such a, maybe like a common theme, or like something that a lot of people are chatting about, is because there's probably like alternate definitions of those things as well, and they probably like convolute over each other a little bit.
I see they're going to aggregator road, right? Uniswap X, I think, is an aggregator, or coming towards to be an aggregator. So they're moving toward the application now, and they kind of letting go of the protocol ones.
Maybe something I would like to maybe ask you guys from like a more kind of like personal investor perspective. I know earlier we chatted about like maybe some special things that we like see in modular founders, those sorts of things. Are there like explicit things that you guys like really enjoy seeing out of like maybe the founders, or even like the technical teams that you have the privilege of supporting, that you would wish to see from others? Are there like highlights there that like you would like to share, like lessons learned from some of these portfolio companies in the modular space that you guys are, that you think is worth sharing?
Sure. I guess, yeah, when you're building like modular infrastructure, the founder should be, I guess, really agile as well. So in modular in that sense. But yeah, some of the backers that we've, some of the founders that we backed, we actually would like to back, founders that has previously built in, whether it's like a monolithic environment or a modular environment. So founders that actually know how to appreciate the modularity nature of blockchain, right? So they're agile, and that they actually understand what's the benefit of having modular infrastructure.
Yeah. What about you, Yuri and Matthias? Anything spicy as far as like things you want to see from founders? Or?
What I like about working with our founders in the modular space is I'm often the dumbest guy in the room, right? So they're all smarter than me, and I'm learning from them as well.
That's the sign of a good investor, if they're willing to say that.
At the same time, I mean, it's not that different, right? They do need to be smart and sort of flexible or agile, as you said, but they also struggle with the same things every other company struggles with. Hiring, team building, just building a company is hard, whatever you do. I think that's sort of it. Yeah, I think that summarizes it.
Yeah, there might be a balance as well, probably. In this space, I've found, at least during my time as an investor, that the majority of kind of the core founding team was quite technical. And oftentimes they do need kind of more, I guess, kind of like kosher traditional support from investors when it comes to the types of like things you can actually do to help them win.
Yeah, I mean, these guys don't need me to tell them how to write code. I have no fucking clue,
sure hope
right?
not.
But maybe helping with a first hire, etc. That's more where they need to sort of be alleviated. So they have their core muscle, their core strength, and we try to work sort of around that.
Yeah, interesting. I want to kind of like go into some maybe potentially spicy topics now that I think are, again, like quite timely when it comes to many of the ideas that are getting discussed over the course of the next 2 days here. what are some of your opinions on kind of like rehypothecation of like proof of stake assets? Specifically, do you think there's like unknown dangers that investors or founders or application builders are not considering? Are there like externalities that you think long and hard about or potentially keep you up at night like I do?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a company in our portfolio, for example, it's a pure Bitcoin company, and they don't like it at all, right? But there's a Bitcoin maximalism involved here, so I understand that, right? You're talking about kind of storage, right, values. But generally, what I find more complicated with the infrastructure now is that you add to the financial complexity, technical complexity, and to the technical complexity, you add scalability complexity. So you might think that, well, if something breaks down, I can all like execute smart contracts and it all goes down this way, but all of a sudden, bam, it doesn't work out because everybody runs through the same gateway. And so you have this all complexity even getting bigger. And it's really hard to evaluate that. How big is that actually? It's a lot of bunch of unknown unknowns. And that makes, I would go slightly, right? Really, really careful about that and see how far you can go with this, because at some point we just break and then you realize what it is. So maybe just do that experimentally with small sums just to trigger and figure it out a little bit. But doing it on a big scale, as we saw also last year, that might be a problematic thing.
Yes, definitely, as we all witnessed last year. Matthias, do you have any spicy takes on this?
Yeah, I mean, I like the experimentation with it. In general, I like experimentation and trying out stuff and maybe breaking. On this specifically, I think the economics behind it are still quite hard, right? So it's hard to quantify the risk of like rehypothecation of assets, as quantifying risk in crypto is fucking hard anyway. And then there's also not that much fees collected right now that you can sort of give enough yield to
Funnel too, yeah.
Yeah, funnel to incentivize people to take that risk. And that's, I think, sort of the big question here. Like, okay, maybe there's a small group of people who will do this, but to incentivize a lot of people, you need a lot of fees, and that's just not there right now.
I think I would broadly agree with that. I maybe want to pose like a question to the audience. Like, I like opening these up to see if anyone has anything to add to the conversation, or maybe things that you disagree with. Like, is there anything that anyone here would like to raise their hand and potentially ask the panel? I'm happy to walk up and give you the mic. I see a Spartan shirt over there. Any spicy takes for your colleague? You can't put Calvin on the spot like that.
Yes, well, I guess one spicy take that we kind of touch on was modular blockchain might at some point bring us back to maximalism, because going back to a point, right, like my previous point, if you're trying to accrue value to a specific layer, you'll start to find other ways to accrue more value, right? So, for example, just thinking out loud here. So a deal layer, if you're trying to like, fees do compress in the future, and you find perhaps you're trying to own another layer instead, maybe execution layers, then you're starting to see, we're going back to the cycle where it's like we're starting to own more of the stack. So, that's perhaps like one spicy take.
Yeah, so then Celestia would at some point be like, hey, that settlement layer on top of us is also quite valuable. Why don't we sort of enshrine it into our stack? Yeah, that's a good bear case.
Yeah. Yuri, any other bear cases in regards to that spicy take?
I think my biggest worry with the whole ecosystem generally is that, are we actually building something completely different and new? Or are we just rebuilding the stuff that's already out there in a little bit slightly different way, and we're just not seeing it because it's so new, it haven't converged yet. But in the end, you just end up with the same system, the same centralized parts. Like a validator is so big, it just controls a bunch of stuff, right? And maybe something so big, it controls a bunch of stuff. You have like a bunch of operators that are just grand, and you haven't seen coming, but the economic gravity of that just made it happen, right?
That's fair. Another pivot maybe in the conversation. Are there like certain types of applications that you guys believe are like specifically empowered by modular infrastructure? I know we've kind of chatted about like, like these concepts of kind of turning specific applications into kind of their own like sovereign execution like layers, et cetera, across the stack. But when you think about kind of like the second order effects, maybe, this time next year or in 2 years, what type of applications do you think will have most benefited from this sort of architecture?
Yeah, I think, sort of a downside of building a modular blockchain is, I think, interoperability. And as a result of that, applications that don't need too much interoperability are going to be, I think, very interesting to begin with. A good example of this could indeed be gaming. A gaming-specific chain for just one game. When I play like FIFA and I want to sell my coins or something on there, I don't need to interact with somebody playing World of Warcraft, right? I have no need for that. Whereas in DeFi, that's very important that you can plug these different Lego blocks into each other. So I think the first wave maybe, and we saw Argus present earlier, will probably be gaming specific chains. So that's, I think, something modularity enables. And then indeed the different execution environments, right? Stuff like the Solana VM, the Fuel VM, Move VM, etc. Maybe order book type of decentralized exchanges will be enabled by that. Although it remains to be seen how MEV will play out there, but these type of products as well.
Do you maybe want to chat on that as far as like some of your like cross-domain MEV perspective when it comes to like how that conceptually alters or is modified by like modular architectures?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about it a lot. One thing we are currently still maybe debating, and I don't have my mind made up yet, is where do you want the MEV to sort of land, right? So one vision is you want the DA layer to capture the MEV because then it will accrue more value and you'll have more economic security. On the other side, you maybe want the MEV to sort of be isolated in a separate execution environment, because then if like one game gets extremely attractive and a lot of people play it, it doesn't trickle down to the other roll-ups. So it's a trade-off, right? Do you want it to go down or not? And it's, I think, where the leader selection happens is where it will go to. And I don't know what the optimal decision is. I think it's still very much an open question.
The first thing it makes me think of is if, and maybe I could be ignorant to this, but whether people have thought about dynamic systems that would be able to like maybe like modify or like point where that MEV could go, but between two layers like that. I don't know if that's been explored or if that's the dumbest idea that's been said here today, but
I also don't know, honestly, but I would be down to sort of look into that more. I think that's one of the more interesting areas that indeed we talked about, these modular founders, if you want to call them like that, are sort of nerds not by and looking into, and I'm sort of happy to tag along with them on doing so.
Yeah, as we kind of like get a little bit closer towards the end of this conversation, maybe opening it up to all of you. You have an audience here that are quite modular pilled. Are there like specific types of things that you want to see built, kind of requests for startups, or any concepts that you think are like rather unexplored or that you wish you had more looks at as far as different ideas?
So when I was reading up, I just started really recently reading about the intent-based systems. And I found it's a really cool way of thinking about how it actually should act. And we have a company that's kind of in a similar space, but it's an agent-based space. And so intents and agents are a similar thing. But in the end, if you look at how an app is built, for example, right, it's not possible to have an app built on just smart contracts. You need some sort of in between, like agents, to trigger certain functions such that the person can just like have a phone in the pocket and just a notification arrives, right, something like that. So you need all those things, and you need to cross the chain barrier to this, the off-chain and on-chain. So I'm excited about this stuff and experimenting more of this kind of things to really figure out, okay, where does blockchain fit into the bigger world-solving problem space than just really running around the small pieces of the blockchain ecosystem itself. Because I think we crossed the barrier already a couple of years ago where blockchain was just a really kind of a big space where you could put all your hope in. And it was not concretely there, it was just a bunch of hope, and you can just really think about, oh, that's the potential. But now it's getting more concrete, and it also shows you more things that breaks, that works, that can solve and cannot solve, right? And it becomes really hard to have the hope. And so you have to really think about now, okay, what does it actually can achieve? Where does it go, and how can we go there? And I think this is kind of it's intent-based thing together with the agent-based. I'm not sure how different they are actually from each other. That's a kind of a different conversation. Is kind of a really nice way to explore it.
Calvin, Matthias, any requests for startups or areas that you wish were maybe ideas that you saw more of as venture investors?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to take it. I think this is going to be a bit boring and somewhat contrarian now. DeFi, it's not very sexy anymore, right? Especially amongst venture investors. I do think the whole real world assets thing is actually quite cool. That we have like close to $1 billion of bonds being on the Ethereum chain right now is, I think, very interesting to see. So in that regard, stuff like Noble that aims to bring USDC onto these Celestia chains, I think it's very interesting. So these type of products that actually connect to the sort of real world or Web 2 world or whatever you want to call it, are quite interesting. I would love to see that more moving forward as we grow more into that adoption part of the tech stack.
USDC, the quintessential real world asset?
I mean, I've been arguing here about end user verification, and now I'm the USDC bull, but yeah.
It's all fair.
And also
That's it.
privacy tech, but that's more generic stuff like Penumbra, Anoma, Nimtech. I think that's sort of where my sort of more crypto native heart lies, and I would love to see more of that as well.
Maybe dig into that a little bit, because I actually feel quite naive as far as like maybe some of the privacy considerations that are empowered maybe uniquely by modular infrastructure. Is there any like thing that you would add to that, or like things you've seen recently that excited you specifically with like privacy type applications or privacy based architectures?
I haven't seen a lot of privacy tech like on a modular ecosystem, like a roll-up that's only privacy or app-specific Tornado Cache would be quite cool. I'm not sure if the sort of... And then on privacy end, you have sort of two layers of it, right? I think a lot of financial institutions want privacy on their orders and don't care if like regulators can see it. And then you have more the crypto anarchistic privacy, which are maybe DarkFi, Nimtech are work on, where sort of everything has to be private. They're very purist about that. In the modular ecosystem, I don't know, you can make a lot of design trade-offs. You can maybe encrypt the mempool, which for financial institutions would be enough privacy, right? So yeah, looking forward to seeing these founders try out stuff there.
It's another one I don't want to bore people with because I feel like it can be quite cliche, but like I'm curious if you guys have any perspectives specifically on, you know, like maybe like non-Web3 native use cases for some of these modular architectures. I think I could probably speak for everyone in the room in the sense that like, you know, like enterprise blockchain, et cetera, has failed in the majority of its capacity. But I'm curious if we feel that there's any inkling of feel that the modular infrastructure could maybe help empower that in some way.
I had this conversation yesterday about like how do you build a social network, a new social network, and I find this is a mistake most people think about social networks in terms of Facebook and Instagram and YouTube's as kind of there's a graph. Because I think in the new way, if you have blockchain, you have this new technology, you can rethink that. And I think in the center of that is the feed, and the feed can be, for example, modular, right? You can actually do and choose your own feed how you want to like it, and the feed through curation connects to people, right? Not anymore through kind of a social graph that already existed and you just walled it in. It really is about like there's a centerpiece where people are curating stuff and that flows all into the feed, and that connects to people, right? And this has the emerging quality of a network then. All of a sudden you have a social network without wanting it, just like it was before. But it's a new way of thinking. And I think that's what blockchain enables, is a new way of thinking the old stuff. All the things that we have already, we can have it back, but we have it in a new way and build it in a different way, and only then it works.
I'd actually like to build on that like last point that you made. Is there anything like very specifically that you guys feel like maybe getting modular pilled, whatever you want to call it, or just like becoming more aware of how people are thinking in the modular kind of infrastructure space? Are there explicit things that has changed around how you think? That could be, I don't know, from like a ethical, philosophical perspective, but also be from a technical perspective as well.
I don't have a whole lot. I could take it back to the enterprise question if you. I don't think we'll see a lot of enterprises starting to build on these systems earlier, right? You asked, like, how do you underwrite the risk of it being quite experimental? I think especially enterprises are scared of that. I do think that sort of a roll-up itself is very interesting for them because they can sort of keep a level of control that maybe they feel like they miss on like an permissionless L1.
Or maybe certain regulatory
yeah, exactly. So I do see a lot of like experimentation happening there, but I do think it's way further out than next year or something, as you asked, right? I don't think they'll be like, oh, we have to deploy a roll-up. No, I think they're more likely to be to look at more established networks.
Cool. Well, now we have probably maybe 2 or so minutes left just to finalize this conversation. But what do you guys hope we are like? You know, if we return here in a year and have the privilege of meeting at the next Modular Summit, what is it that you hope you're seeing become successful? What are some of the, like maybe the next milestones that you hope you see this space achieve in order to kind of get us to the next stage?
I mean, Celestia launching is a good first one, right? Launching their mainnet successfully. Second, I think also more CK rollups going live like in full. I know CK Sync is sort of live, but that ecosystem maturing to a similar sort of level as maybe the Arbitrum ecosystem is. Because I know we're here at like Modular Summit and we're talking about Celestia, but a lot of rollups also have like the largest ecosystems by far on Ethereum. EIP 4844 going live successfully would be pretty cool, I think, as that makes block space more accessible for these rollups. And maybe the first sovereign rollup on Celestia, more app-specific rollups going live.
Hopefully some accelerationism around restaking as well, maybe.
Yeah,
fast experiments, but small ones, hopefully. What about you guys?
Yeah. So aside from those, I think we want to see more of the dApp layer development as well. So I actually want to touch on on-chain gaming as well. So I feel like on-chain gaming could actually take advantage of what modular blockchain could actually offer. So bringing the entire game logic as well as game economy on-chain could actually bring about like siloed different type of economies on the side, right? So for example, strategy game, you're trying to like attack someone, right? Let's say it's a and then someone can like front run, that action. It will be like
priority.
It will create like different new dynamics, right? So I feel like that's some place that we can perhaps.
I've definitely heard Scott from Argus talk a lot about what excites him building like modular infrastructure specifically for like game designers is like attempting to create something that can create like very emergent, like net new like player behaviors, because I think that's one of the things that actually makes games exciting, or like when good games become exciting is when it's like something you haven't done before. I remember like reselling in-game assets for the first time. That's like actually what got me into crypto in 2012. I think seeing more experiments around that will be pretty exciting as well. Awesome, guys. I think we're just at time. So really appreciate the attention from everyone and everyone supporting the whole gang here at Celestia and Maven. Appreciate you guys having us. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your time in Paris, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.